She threw me out of her wedding over a gift. Now I'm taking back everything I gave her. If you think the worst pain a mother can feel is childbirth, you've never been thrown out of your own daughter's wedding like a stranger with a stain on her dress. I remember that morning like it was carved into the bones of the earth. The sun was out too early for October, bold and cheerful, as if it didn't know what kind of betrayal was brewing beneath the satin and smiles. I had woken up at 5, the way I always do when something big is coming. Easter Sundays, graduation days, funerals. And make no mistake, child, what happened that day felt like a death. Maybe not of a body, but of something deeper. I had spent weeks picking out her gift, not because I didn't know what she wanted. I knew exactly what she wanted. Cash. Neatly counted, crisp, impersonal. A transfer, like a transaction. But that's never how I raised her. I raised her to understand meaning. I raised her to respect legacy. So instead, I gave her what I had worn on my own wedding day. A pearl brooch shaped like a magnolia blossom, passed to me from my mother, who got it from hers. The clasp was old but strong, the kind of strong that doesn't shine loud but holds on through storms. I had it cleaned, boxed in blue velvet, tied with ivory ribbon. When I handed it to her that morning, before she walked down the aisle, I saw her eyes flick toward the package, then up to mine. And I should have known from that look. The one that said, "This isn't what I asked for." She opened it in the bridal suite, surrounded by her friends, faces painted like magazine covers, nails sharp, voices full of performative joy. When she pulled the brooch out, there was a flicker, not of awe, not of warmth, but something colder. Her smile froze just slightly. Then came the words, "Thanks, Mom, but this isn't really my style." There was a beat of silence in the room. One of her bridesmaids chuckled, too loud, too fake, and then she placed the box on the table like it was a thing she didn't want to touch anymore. I should have walked out then, but I didn't. I stayed, sat quietly through the ceremony, clapped when the rings were exchanged, smiled in pictures, posed like the supportive mother everyone assumed I was, but the air between us had already changed. Something had snapped, invisible but sharp. And it all came to a head at the reception. The room was full of gold light and expensive wine, white chairs with bows, tables dressed like royalty. People were laughing, dancing, sipping champagne like joy was currency. And I, in my best emerald dress and low kitten heels, stood in the corner watching my daughter float from guest to guest like a queen. Then she walked up to me, not alone. Her new husband trailing her like a shadow, his jaw clenched, his hand already halfway in his pocket. She didn't hug me, didn't thank me for coming, didn't even look me in the eyes. "Mom," she said, low but firm, "I think it's best if you leave." I blinked. "Excuse me? It's just, this isn't the time for emotional tension. You've made your point, and I think it's better for everyone if you head out." I looked at her. Really looked, and in her eyes I saw not a bride, not a daughter, but a stranger in my child's skin. Her husband didn't speak, just nodded along like some nervous intern ready to file the paperwork for her cold-hearted request. "All this," I said slowly, "because I didn't give you money?" She didn't flinch. "This is my day, Mom. I don't want drama." And just like that, I was dismissed, not with a scene, not with shouting, but with the precise cruelty of someone who knows exactly where to cut so the bleeding happens inside. I left. I didn't make a fuss, didn't throw the brooch, didn't even let a tear fall until I was halfway home, driving alone in the dress I bought just for her wedding. And when I pulled into my driveway, the one she grew up walking across barefoot every summer, the one I built working 3 jobs to afford, I sat in the car for 15 minutes, Not crying, not screaming, just reckoning. And that's when it hit me. I had spent my whole life feeding a mouth that learned to spit at the hand that fed it. I gave her everything. A roof, clothes, warmth, tuition, a place to cry, a place to heal. And in return, she gave me a party invite with a timed exit. But that was the last time. No more free rides, no more second chances. She wanted to cut the cord? Fine, let her feel what it's like to fall without a safety net. Because the house? Mine. The business? Built with my sweat? The car she drives? Still in my name. And if she wants to forget what I gave her, then it's time she remembers exactly what she lost. They say a mother's love is unconditional, but even God has commandments. And when you break them long enough, you meet consequence. She wanted distance. Now she'll learn what it costs. I didn't sleep that night. Not from grief. No, that part had already done its damage. Like a summer storm that tears through and leaves you cold but awake. I stayed up in the living room, arms folded under the lamp, the brooch still in my purse, unopened. The gift she tossed aside like a napkin with lipstick on it. I couldn't bring myself to look at it just yet. I was afraid it might still smell like her perfume. Instead, I sat in the quiet and did something I hadn't done in years. I counted. Not emotions, not blessings, not sorrows, but deeds. Lines on documents, down payments, loan approvals, business licenses, and every single one had one thing in common. My name, the boutique she now manages downtown. I funded the first lease, co-signed the LLC, put up the collateral when the bank wouldn't touch her husband's shaky credit. The car she drove to the bridal shower, my name on the registration, the 2-bedroom condo they flipped and used to help pay for the wedding venue. Guess who bought it for a graduation gift? Cash down. That girl may have thrown me out of a ballroom, but she'd been dancing on my sacrifices for years. I picked up the phone and called Elijah, my cousin's son, real estate paralegal. Always said, if you ever need anything legal but don't want to pay lawyer rates, Auntie, I got you. He picked up after 2 rings. Hey, Auntie L, you okay? I need to see every paper I ever signed for that girl. Title deeds, LLC filings, transfer agreements, all of it. He didn't ask why. He just said, give me till tomorrow, I'll have it pulled. I thanked him. Then I picked up the brooch box, held it in my lap for a long minute, and finally opened it. Still gleaming, still whole, unlike the girl I gave it to. By noon the next day, the folder was on my dining room table, neatly tabbed, itemized, labeled with fluorescent stickies like a roadmap of financial motherhood. And God, what a road it had been. That folder held 16 years of paperwork, loans taken in my name, tax forms I signed for her boutique, a vehicle registration she never once asked to transfer. I flipped page after page and felt the weight of it all, the generosity, the blind faith, the patience, and then the clarity. She hadn't just disrespected me. She'd forgotten I was the reason she could stand tall at all. But now I would remind her, not with shouting, not with fists, with documents, with signatures, with every signature that said, this belongs to me. That evening, I called in favors. I spoke with Regina, my old neighbor who works in probate and property law. I reached out to Gloria at church, whose brother does asset recovery, and was all too happy to look over the situation. I even contacted the leasing manager for the boutique's plaza and asked if they'd received any updated ownership forms. They hadn't. Still had my name on file. Still considered me majority owner. Imagine that. All this time, she strutted around that little shop like she was queen of the hill, sipping iced lattes and yelling at interns. And all it would take is one phone call to transfer management rights and put a padlock on the front door. I didn't do it yet, but I could. And for the first time in a long time, the power was mine, not emotional, not begging for love that wouldn't come. actual, legal, concrete power. She wanted to pretend I was just her mother. Let her now remember I was also her foundation, and now I was rising. Not in spite, not in vengeance, but in response, because when a child forgets how they were built, you have to let them feel the ground shake beneath them. She thought throwing me out would leave me broken. But I was only bruised, and bruises heal, especially when backed by paper, prayer, and the quiet fury of a mother done being used. There's a certain silence that settles in the house once a mother stops justifying everything she's done for her children. It isn't an angry quiet, not the kind that slams doors or rattles plates. No, this one is deliberate. It's the sound of a woman collecting herself not to retreat, but to return as someone far more dangerous than the version they mistook for weak. A woman with nothing left to prove but everything to retrieve. The morning after I reviewed those papers, all those years of sacrifice dressed up in polite signatures and family help, I ironed my blouse, polished my low heels, and walked out the door with a stillness that only comes when the fog has lifted and what remains is cold, clear sky. I arrived at the courthouse just after opening. The clerk at the counter barely looked up until she saw my name printed on the form. Then she straightened her back like her body knew instinctively not to dismiss a woman who'd come to reclaim her own. I filed the paperwork without flinching, a request for reassumption of financial control over the boutique's business accounts and a petition to seize my property, the car, as the borrower had violated the terms of use. The wording wasn't mine. The lawyer drafted that. But the meaning? Oh, that was all me. By noon, the first envelope was sealed and ready, addressed to my daughter, marked urgent, stamped by the very system she thought I'd never touch. That afternoon, I made the second call, the one that would change the locks. The leasing company's manager, a pale-skinned woman named Carolyn with a clipboard voice, was polite but firm. Ms. Harris, if your name remains on file as principal leaseholder and no transfer of management has been submitted or notarized, you are well within your rights to assume control. Then do so, I said plainly. I'll be coming by next week. Let her know the locks will change if the transition isn't handled by then. She hesitated. Are you sure you want to pursue this formally? It's your daughter. I didn't blink. She made her position clear. Now I'm making mine. She clicked her pen once, soft, sharp, and said, "Understood." That word, understood, rang in my ear the whole ride home. She called that night, not with softness, not with guilt, with disbelief. "Mama, what the hell is this?" I had expected the voice, half snarl, half wounded girl, and I was ready. This is me responding to what you said at your wedding. You wanted me gone. I'm honoring that request, legally, financially, and permanently. There was a pause on the line, then, over a brooch? I nearly laughed. But I didn't. No, baby, not over a brooch, over every meal I cooked that you never thanked me for, over the car I paid off while you bragged like it was yours, over the business you call independent while signing my checks. Her voice cracked. Mama, don't do this. You already did, sweet girl. On the most important day of your life, you told the world I was expendable. Now the world's going to show you what happens when your foundation walks away. I was overwhelmed. No, you were ungrateful. Silence. The kind that settles in the belly like a stone and then a whisper. You're really serious. As a signature on a deed, baby. She didn't call again that night. The next morning, the second envelope left the post office, one to her husband, addressed directly. He didn't throw me out of the wedding, but he stood there and watched. And silence is consent. Now he would receive his own copy of the lien on the condo, the one they flipped, the one they lived in rent-free for 3 years, a gentle reminder that I was not just mother, I was also lender. And lenders? They collect. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. But I did sit by the window that evening, fingers wrapped around a mug of tea, watching the sun settle across the branches like quiet justice. Somewhere across town, my daughter would be opening those letters, reading those names, seeing those numbers. She would realize, perhaps for the first time, that everything she stood on had been held up by someone she no longer respected, and now she'd feel what it meant to fall. She thought my love was a currency with no limit, but I've spent too long overdrafting my soul, and now the bank of my patience is closed. She wants independence? Let her earn it from scratch. The knock on my front door came just past 6. Right when the sky had started to bruise into twilight and the cicadas outside were just beginning their evening chorus. I didn't move right away. I stayed seated in my armchair, the one facing the window with my Bible open but unread on my lap, because I already knew who it was. I didn't need to look through the curtains to feel that familiar blend of entitlement and desperation hovering on my front porch like smoke from an old fire that never quite went out. I waited long enough to let her feel the uncertainty. Then I opened the door. She stood there in a coat too thin for the weather, her eyes scanning my face as if trying to locate the mother she once knew, the one who always gave in, always forgave, always bent just enough to be dismissed. But she didn't find her. Not this time. That woman had been retired. Buried even. What stood before her now was the woman who signed every check and remembered every insult. "Mom, can we talk?" I stepped aside without a word, letting her in not out of obligation but as a formality, like a landowner allowing a visitor onto property that's still hers, regardless of who's been planting flags. She walked in cautiously, her eyes roaming the room like she expected something to have changed. Maybe a new photo missing from the shelf, or the scent of candles she used to hate. But everything was in its place, and yet the air had shifted. Because I had shifted. She stayed standing. I sat. "I got the letters," she began. Her voice was low, carefully controlled, but I could already hear the tremble beneath it, the kind that leaks out when someone realizes the house of cards they built is starting to wobble. I nodded, slow and steady. "Good. Then you understand I'm not bluffing." She blinked hard. "You filed official claims on the car and the business. Do you know what that could do to me? To my credit? To your pride?" I interrupted gently. "To your illusion that you did it all by yourself?" She bit her lip and looked down. For a moment, she was that little girl again, the one who scraped her knees and ran to me with tears, expecting nothing but open arms. But life had turned, and so had I. "I just think this has gone far enough," she said, trying to steady her voice. "We both said things. Emotions ran high. I didn't mean to offend you at the wedding." I raised an eyebrow. "You didn't mean to offend me, and yet you asked me to leave as if I were a stranger who wandered in off the street. You didn't just offend me, baby. You erased me, and now you want to speak as if we're equals at a negotiation table." She crossed her arms. "What do you want, Mom? An apology? A public announcement? Do you want me to grovel in front of everyone?" I leaned forward, clasping my hands calmly. "No, sweetheart. I want you to face the truth. Not the version you've crafted for social media or clients or even your husband, but the real truth. You've built your life on generosity you mistook for weakness. And now that generosity has been recalled." She flinched. She hadn't expected clarity. She came armed for bitterness. But I had no bitterness left, only a ledger. "I was overwhelmed," she said, quieter now. "It was my wedding. I didn't mean for it to spiral like that." "You didn't mean for it to spiral because you never expected a reaction?" I answered. "You thought I'd swallow the humiliation like I always have, smile through it, write another check, show up next time like nothing happened. But there will be no next time, baby." This was it. She stood there, visibly shaken. The silence between us stretched, not empty, but thick with everything unsaid, everything ungrateful, everything too late. "You've changed," she whispered. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. "No, I've remembered who I am." She left soon after. Not with a slam of the door, not with angry words, but with a look over her shoulder that told me everything I needed to know. She didn't come to apologize. She came to control, and now she knows that part of her life is gone. I didn't just walk away. I took the ground with me. She thought if she spoke softly enough, I'd fold like old linen, but I don't break for whispers anymore. I break cycles. And this one, it ends here. Court doesn't move fast. It creeps, it waits, it demands patience and paperwork, and the kind of stillness only women like me have learned to master. But when you've spent decades giving your life away in pieces, one loan, one car, one signature at a time, you don't mind waiting a little longer to take it back. The morning of the first hearing, I sat in the lobby of the county courthouse dressed in navy blue, a color the Bible associates with loyalty and judgment. Not vengeance, not anger, but justice, the quiet kind, with clean hems and pressed sleeves. Beside me was McBride, my lawyer, with his folders tucked under one arm and his calm, no-nonsense voice already rehearsing every detail of the file. Across the room sat my daughter and her husband. They looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, no. She still wore her posture like armor, and he still had that stiff-necked tension of a man who knew better, but kept quiet. But they sat there like the wind had gone out of them, like they'd finally realized that what was coming wasn't just a conversation, it was judgment. The courtroom was not grand, and no sweeping arches, no chandelier, just four cream walls, one flag, one judge, and truth. That was enough for me. When the hearing began, I didn't look at them, not out of pride, out of peace, because I already knew who I was now, and I didn't need to see their eyes to feel my worth anymore. McBride spoke first. He laid out the facts like scripture. My name on the boutique's incorporation paperwork, my ownership of the vehicle still used by the defendants. My original investment in the condominium property they flipped without notifying me. And finally, my legal right to reclaim, revoke, or transfer management on all three. The judge, a middle-aged woman with steel gray hair and no time for sentiment, nodded carefully as she reviewed the pages. Then she turned to them. "Do the defendants dispute ownership of these assets?" she asked, her voice cool and unhurried. My daughter's lawyer, a man too young to know when to keep quiet, cleared his throat and leaned forward. "Your Honor, this is clearly a family issue. Emotional tensions, unresolved feelings. We believe this can be resolved without formal action." The judge raised one eyebrow. "And yet here we are, in a court of law, not family therapy. Do you dispute the documentation?" A pause, then, "No, Your Honor, we don't." She turned to me. "Ms. Harris, what is your desired outcome?" I stood, my legs solid beneath me, and when I spoke, my voice was not loud, but it carried. "I want what belongs to me restored. The vehicle returned. The business placed under my sole management, and I want it on record that the kindness I offered was not forgotten. It was stolen." Gasps came from somewhere in the back of the room, not dramatic ones, just air. Sharp air being pulled in by those who finally saw the full picture. The judge nodded again, calm, icy. "Petition granted." She tapped her gavel. 3 seconds, a lifetime. When we stepped out into the hallway, my daughter didn't follow immediately. I knew she would come, eventually. She always did. Not when she wanted to reconcile, but when she wanted to reclaim a little control. She appeared at the far end of the corridor, moving slowly, hands shaking slightly as she reached for her purse, like she didn't know how to fill the silence now that the law had spoken. "Mama," she began. But I turned, not in anger, just in finality. "Not now, baby. That was the last time you called me just to keep me quiet, and silence isn't my language anymore." I walked away. The world didn't end behind me, it just shifted, and this time it turned in my favor. The lock turned with a quiet click, almost too soft for what it meant, but I stood there. Outside the boutique I had helped them open 4 years ago, watching as the locksmith slid the final bolt into place. A fresh sign had already been taped to the inside of the glass door, closed for restructuring. It was the kind of wording that didn't scream conflict, it whispered control. Carolyn from the leasing office had met me at 9:15 sharp, clipboard in hand, her steps brisk but respectful. I didn't need to explain much. The court order had already arrived. She simply handed me the new keys and said, "It's officially yours again, Ms. Harris. You want us to change the signage?" I smiled, slow and deep. "Not yet. Let her drive by and see it just like this. Let her feel what I felt, arriving at something you built, only to find out you're not welcome anymore." That afternoon, the car was returned. No ceremony, no apology. A tow truck dropped it in front of my house, tires hissing, engine sputtering like it was reluctant to let go. The man behind the wheel barely made eye contact, but I signed the form anyway. It still had her perfume in the seats, still had a pair of heels in the back seat and an old coffee cup in the cup holder. I didn't touch either. Just sat in the driver's seat, adjusted the mirrors, and turned the engine over. It purred. Like it remembered me. It wasn't until dusk that he came. I saw him from the kitchen window, her husband Marcus standing at the edge of my porch like a man waiting for judgment, hands in his pockets, head slightly bowed the way people stand when they're finally ready to say what they should have said a year ago. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. Let him stand where I once stood, outside. "Miss Harris," he began, then stopped himself. "Laverne." His voice was heavy, like something had finally weighed on him enough to press down past the surface. "I just want you to know, I didn't want it to get this far." I nodded once, slowly, and yet here we are. He looked down at the floorboards of the porch like they held the answers. "She's hurting. So did I." Silence. Then he looked at me, really looked. For the first time without that blank, obedient expression, there was something there now. Regret, maybe, or realization. "I never stood up for you. Not once." "No," I said, arms crossed. "You stood by, and standing by is just a slower kind of betrayal." He exhaled. "I want to fix it." I tilted my head, studying him the way I once studied invoices and legal forms, carefully without giving away the answer. "This isn't yours to fix, Marcus. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a pattern, and patterns don't break until the people wearing them are forced to see what they've woven." "So that's it? That's justice," I said. "Not revenge, not anger, just balance." He stepped back, nodded, then turned and walked off the porch. No shouting, no begging. He finally understood, and I was no longer asking to be understood. That night, I sat alone in my living room with the window open just enough to let in the hum of streetlights and the far-off rustle of wind in the trees. The boutique was mine again. The car was parked in my driveway. The house was quiet, not because someone had silenced me, but because I had chosen the silence. For the first time in years, I belonged entirely to myself, and Lord, did that feel holy. They thought taking my things would leave me empty, but the only thing they ever truly owned was my silence. And now that I've taken it back, they've got nothing left. It had been 12 days since the court hearing, 10 since the boutique shut its doors, 7 since the car rolled back into my driveway. And in all that time, she hadn't called. Not once. So when her car pulled up across the street, I didn't stand. I didn't open the blinds. I simply turned off the stove, wiped my hands dry, and sat back down in the kitchen, letting the world outside move at its own pace. The knock came softer this time. Not angry, not proud, just calculated. She was learning. I opened the door slowly, leaving the screen between us. Her eyes, once sharp and dressed for judgment, now flickered with something harder to read. Not sadness, no. That would have required sincerity. It was closer to panic dressed as humility. She looked thinner, but not in a way that invited sympathy. More like someone who hadn't eaten in a while because they'd lost their appetite for consequences. "Mom," she said, I've been thinking." I nodded, said nothing. Let her speak into the vacuum she created. I realize now that I made some mistakes. I was under pressure, the wedding, the expectations, but I didn't mean to hurt you. I finally opened the screen door. Not all the way. Just enough for air to pass through. "But you did hurt me, and you did mean it. Maybe not in the moment, but in every moment after. When you chose silence over truth." She winced. Just slightly. But the edges of her mouth were already tightening, preparing the next defense. "I want to fix things. We can sit down, talk like we used to. I'm even willing to rework the business agreement. We could rebrand, make it a family business again." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. She didn't want to heal. She wanted access. And I wasn't a door anymore. I was a wall. "No," I said gently. "We won't be sitting down. We won't be revisiting anything. The time for negotiation passed the day you made me feel like a stranger in your future." "I just want to start over," she pleaded, stepping closer. "Then start from scratch like I did." Her jaw tensed. That was the line she hadn't prepared for. The truth she hadn't rehearsed. She had expected resistance. She hadn't expected peace, because people like her, people who mistake generosity for submission, never know how to respond when the giving stops without noise or grief. Just silence. Clean. Complete. I didn't slam the door. I didn't raise my voice. I simply looked her in the eye and said the only thing that still needed saying, "You're not the little girl who used to run into my arms when she scraped her knee. And I'm not the mother who lets herself be bled dry in the name of love. You made a choice, now live in it." She stood there frozen, like someone who'd been told the house they grew up in had been sold to someone else. Which, in a way, it had, because I no longer lived in guilt. I lived in truth. And there was no guest room in truth for people who tried to evict you from your own soul. She didn't come for forgiveness, she came for access. But you don't hand the keys back to someone who tried to lock you out of your own life. Some doors don't close with slams, they close with silence. They thought I'd be waiting when the dust settled. But I had already rebuilt on land they never owned. It's strange what stillness feels like after a storm. Not the kind of stillness that's hollow, the one filled with questions and broken pieces. No, this one is earned, a soft, quiet rhythm in my chest, tea that stays hot because no one's yelling, floorboards that creak just for the joy of existing, mail that brings only letters and silence, not demands or drama. I sat that morning in the sunroom, the one I never used before because I was always too tired, too worried, too occupied with being needed. Now it was my favorite corner, soft yellow light pooling across the floor, a quilt on my lap, and a notepad in hand. I was writing a letter, not because it would change anything, but because some things deserve to be said, even if they'll never be heard. Dear Camille, you came to me not long ago and said you wanted to start over. But baby, starting over means letting go of what you ruined and building something new with clean hands. You've never truly seen what I gave you. Not the house, not the car, not the business. I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about the nights I went hungry so you could have shoes, the days I held your dreams like they were my own, the years I stayed small so you could grow, and in return you showed the world that I was disposable. I forgive you, not because you asked and not because you deserve it, but because I refuse to carry bitterness into this new life. But forgiveness is not forgetfulness. You made a choice, and so did I. I chose to live free. I chose to stop begging to be seen, and I chose to love myself fully, finally, and without apology. I hope one day you understand that love is not owed. It is earned. May your journey teach you what I once tried to, Mama. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. No stamp, no envelope, just truth, written down to clear space inside me. Later that week, I bought a set of paints. Watercolors, soft, unruly, stubborn as rain. I hadn't painted since high school, since before Camille. But the moment I put that first color down on canvas, I felt something loosen in me, like a tight thread finally snapping. It wasn't art, it was release. The boutique stayed closed, the car stayed parked, the house stayed quiet, and I stayed at peace. No one knocking, no one taking, no one claiming love like a prize they never earned. Just me. Whole. Finally. They thought I'd spend the rest of my days waiting at the edge of their lives, but I walked back into my own and found it still had room for joy. I am not the mother they mistreated. I am the woman they underestimated, and I built something they can't take back, my freedom.